So yeah, for folks who don't know, the Honorable Senator Pat Jehlen is luckily here with us despite dealing with a bout of COVID. So we're so fortunate to have her. And she was also in one of the very first cohorts of VISTA in 1965. So that's very exciting that you're here. Also to commemorate the 30th anniversary of AmeriCorps. So yeah, I think we can wait a little bit as folks trickle in. But I guess I can start just to give a brief background about myself. My name is Emma Alcorn, and for the past year, I've been serving as the Community Outreach, Development, and Language Access VISTA at the Multilingual and Multicultural Center for Portland Public Schools. So now I'd love to introduce Senator Pat Jehlen, who is a representative from Massachusetts, and she represents the cities of Cambridge, Medford, Somerville, and Winchester. And we're happy that you were able to push through and be here with us. So I guess to give a little bit of background about AmeriCorps itself, as I just said, this is the celebration of the 30th anniversary of AmeriCorps. And VISTA actually began in 1964 when President Lyndon B. Johnson created it because of the war on poverty. And a year later, Senator Jehlen joined VISTA and began her amazing career in politics, education, and community engagement and service. So she has so much wisdom to impart on us about her experiences as a VISTA whose career has absolutely blossomed. So I have so many questions for you, Senator Jehlen. But before we begin, I just want to make a really brief disclaimer, which is that AmeriCorps is a bipartisanly supported and nonpartisan national service program that aims to engage citizens in service and make their community stronger, no matter what their political beliefs may be. So this speaker series is designed to highlight former national service members and how their service helped them become successful in their chosen field. So these events are not an opportunity to promote a political campaign or advocate for individuals to support one side of a political issue or another, but we have so many things to talk about just regarding your VISTA service and all the wonderful things you've done as a result of that. So please, if anyone has a question at any point during the webinar for Senator Jehlen, please throw it into the chat and we'll get to them as time allows. But yeah, just please keep that in mind when you're formulating your questions. So I have some questions for you, Senator Jehlen. I don't know if you want to say any words of introduction before I start, but
I don't know how I did think a lot. This was really made me think a lot. The questions are really good, but I sort of wrote down some of the things. I thought maybe the best thing to think about was what I learned in VISTA, and if I had any, you were looking for career advice for your folks, I could think a little bit. Some of you are mid-career, it looks like to me. Some of you are like me, exploring, like I was, exploring the future. I can't remember your questions anymore. Let me look at your questions.
I can repeat them. No worries.
Well, I think that's really it. Why don't I didn't follow your prompts as much as I could, but I think I did try to answer some of your questions. So why don't I just sort of talk about my experiences and what I've drawn from them.
Sure, that'd be wonderful. And then we can hop into the
Then
questions
we can,
at any time.
and I'm not real good at talking, so
I don't believe that.
Well, yeah.
But
But
yes, absolutely. Your experiences and what you've learned from VISTA are, that would be so valuable for all of us. So thank you.
So first of all, I just want to thank everybody here who is in VISTA or has been. I think it's a really good way to explore the world and ways to be helpful in it. I don't know how helpful I can be in advice. I personally didn't fall far from my family tree in terms of my commitment to social justice and peace. But what VISTA did was get me out of my middle class bubble. I got to really know people and admire them who were poor and were struggling, and my parents did change a lot from their family's opinions, and I think it was because college took them outside of their bubbles. My father in particular grew up in a very racist and conservative community, And in 2024, the county he grew up in voted over 90% for Trump. So my father ended up being fired from his job because he was integrating work camps for students at the University of Texas, and we moved to Massachusetts. So out of that bubble. But I think getting to know different communities is a big thing that happens in Vista. You go to a place that you didn't know before, usually, and maybe it's very different. So I think one of the values for me and for many of us is to get us to work with people with different experiences and different ideas. And I don't know if you all feel that way. You can mention that later, maybe. But in the very beginning, VISTA focused on community organizing. They would send us into low-income communities after a training period in Oregon, they would train us, and then they would train us in Saul Alinsky community organizing to send people into working class communities and to organize people and to represent themselves and gain power. So for me, that was very valuable. I'm not sure how helpful it was to the communities I was in, but when I came back home, I wanted to get a job as a community organizer because I thought that that was the way to make the kinds of change that I believed in. But all the jobs in community organizing were in Black communities. I thought I could be great at it, but the people who were hiring were absolutely right to want to hire people from those communities. So when I came back to Newton, which is a very middle-class community, and I worked for a summer in community organizing at the time against the war in Vietnam, and I worked in Newton. So I worked with my community, and I worked with a lot of even younger people and decided a good way to make change in the world would be working with younger people. So I trained to be a teacher, and then I was a teacher. But I think probably partly because I couldn't afford to live in Newton on a teacher's salary, and partly because there was an idea on the left that progressives like me should live in working class communities and sink down our roots and organize among people who were at least looked like us. And so I moved to Somerville, which was a very working class and immigrant community. And it was very different. But I joined a lot of organizations as a member of that community. I joined a peace group, our ward civic association that fought off a highway through our neighborhood. We created a teen center. There was a parents group to improve schools, a food co-op. And then I joined many campaigns for mayor, for alderman, for school committee, and the legislature. And I made lifelong friends. I really became part of this continually changing community, which is now so, unfortunately, in my view, very upscale, and it excludes the kinds of people that lived here when I moved here. But we started raising our children here and sinking roots, and I never expected to run for a public office. I am extremely shy. But after working in many campaigns for candidates for school committee in our ward, I started to think about what kind of work I could do while I was raising my children. And there was an opening for school committee. I ran for school committee and I won. And even though I was new and there was a real prejudice against outsiders, a lot of people knew me because I had worked with them. So here's where I thought I could talk about my lessons from VISTA and from my career. And so one lesson is serendipity. It's great to have a life planned, and I didn't, and I still don't. I'm 80 years old. I don't know what's next. I mean, I'm running for re-election, but I know I found unexpected opportunities many times. Just this week, a friend told me that after college, she was looking for a job, any job, and she got hired by a florist. But right before she started, she got another interview with a school for autistic children. And the principal told her what the kids would be like and how awful and hard it would be. And she got so excited that she tried it out and she found the job that she held for the rest of her life. I mean, the career I mean, she moved up in the organization, but she always worked with autistic kids. And so that was totally serendipitous. And it can happen at any point in your life. I never ran against an incumbent, but I ran when there was an opportunity and I was ready. My husband retired a few years ago. He didn't want to sit around the house, and he doesn't. He works harder than he ever did in his life because he got involved with some Boston public school parents who said, we need a way to stay in touch and to know what's happening. The Globe is not, the newspapers are not enough. And so he started a blog about Boston public schools, and a lot of people read it, and a lot of people contribute to it. And newspapers actually pick up his stories, and he is so happy and so busy. So there again, he found an opportunity just in talking to people about what was needed. So another thing I learned in VISTA was how important communities are. Having a community you feel part of that's committed to your same goals and to each other will keep you going in the work that's often frustrating and disappointing. If peace and social justice were easy to achieve, we would already be there and have nothing to do. But recognizing the communities that people already have and are part of is so important in all kinds of organizing and social change, and I would say in politics. For example, when you're running for office, I hope, or even if you're, no, not just if you're running for office, if you're trying to organize, what I did not understand when I was in VISTA and nobody explained to me, is that there were already groups that existed in a community that might already or potentially support your values and ideas, and you can reach out and involve them, or even better, probably integrate yourself into them. So I've always thought in campaigning, for example, that asking people to reach out to their social networks, maybe by sending cards to their friends, is a very effective way to campaign using networks. But probably the biggest lesson I took for politics from community organizing was about listening. I'm still very shy, but this but I can talk to people if I have a reason to talk to them that is not about me. So I'm not a good campaigner, at least according to current practice. In current scientific campaigning, each volunteer is assigned a turf. And when someone knocks on answers the door, you say something like, "Hi, my name is Pat Jehlen, and I'm running for school committee. And here's what I want to do on the school committee. Can I count on your vote on November 2nd?" You want to identify as many voters as possible, and then you turn them out. I take a lot more time in canvassing, and my staffs are always mad at me. I say my name, what I'm running for, and then something like, what do you think is the biggest problem in our community? Right now, 90% of people say housing. And then we talk about their experiences and their observations and a little bit of my ideas. I do ask them to consider voting for me, but I have never asked someone if I could count on their vote. So I think listening is a real important skill or practice for almost any job. And maybe it's an advantage in some situations to be a little shy and not be a lot of, let's say that many people in politics think talking about themselves is the most important thing. And you have to tell your story. But listening is real important. And it's extremely important in conflict situations. It's also relatively rare in conflict situations. I would say extremely rare. So I don't know if any of this is helpful when you're thinking about your own lives, but I'd like to hear more about what you're doing and thinking. And certainly glad to hear if Emma wants to follow up with her questions or the other questions that people might have.
I mean, there's so much to ask you now just based on that short kind of description you gave of your work and how you sort of got to where you are now. For me, I mean, what I'm really interested in is like the creation of a network through kind of means that you wouldn't expect. So because I work for Portland Public Schools, I've met so many people and made so many connections. And you're right, listening is kind of paramount to how we begin to understand the root of a lot of our social issues. I'm really curious about, and I'm sure other people are as well, about your earliest inspirations for this work. I know you talked about your father and the work that he did, but your mother was also very involved in community organizing and activism. So I'd love it if you could share a little bit about both of them and the work that they did and sort of how that inspired you in terms of listening and just regarding, how you came to VISTA and eventually to politics.
It is obviously all of us are influenced one way or another by our families. I think I probably, growing up, saw my father as more active because his experiences were so dramatic, like being under attack in the newspaper, being fired and having to move. He was once asked to run for Congress. I think one difference now is that women are not expected to just. My mother was never expected to work full time once she had children. And she didn't have to because my father could make enough money to support a family. That's just not true anymore. That pretty much every family, you have two working parents. And women, I think there's something lost and something gained in all these changes. That my mother obviously had a big influence on me, but she'd never worked full time after she had kids. And she did a lot of volunteering. She was a Girl Scout leader for so many years. She was a draft counselor. She was a Sunday school superintendent. Of course, she didn't get paid. So I actually want both. I want to be able to work full time. I want to be a full-time mother. I want to be a full-time volunteer. I want all those things. And that is real frustrating for me because I think, and I want to have a neat and perfect house. So it is real hard to do all those things together. So I don't know if that's answering your question, but I wanted to be like both my parents in that particular way. Yeah.
So I have another question for you. You kind of briefly touched on this, but during your first year of VISTA, you went to North Carolina, which was a year after Freedom Summer. So for those of you who don't know, and sorry, there are dogs barking in the background. Freedom Summer was a civil rights movement led by Black activists in response to Jim Crow laws and the suppression of Black voters. And it also laid the groundwork for the Voters' Rights Act of 1965. And I know that this was sort of bleeding into the work that you did during your year of service. So I'd love to hear more about experiences you had during that time and how
Well,
you sort of.
they sent a little group of us to North Carolina. And again, this is ancient history, but there had been a good bit of violence in the amongst in Freedom Riders and Freedom Summer. And we were going to go work with migrant workers. And again, I think none of you is old enough to remember, but it didn't surprise me because I grew up in Texas a little bit. But there were separate bathrooms in the county courthouse where we worked. And there were separate agriculture agricultural agents. At least there were Black agricultural agents. How about that? But people didn't work together. And it was perceived by some that we were not from there, right? From, we were out, perceived as outside agitators because just talking to Black people was very scary to some people, including the Ku Klux Klan, and there was an active Klan in the county. And Vista really didn't want that headline. They didn't want, well, I guess they also didn't want us to get hurt or worse. So they pulled us out and sent us to Chicago Heights, which was not as dangerous, at least at the time. So instead of working with Black migrants, I was working with Chicanos. I don't think people call them, I don't know what people call themselves now in Chicago Heights, but we were working with people who had settled there, settled migrants during most of the year, and then during the summer with people who were farm workers picking tomatoes and cucumbers. So that was good. Anyway, they were both, I would say I was not in North Carolina enough to get a sense of what it would have been like. I did,
Right.
I lived with a woman who had been a Nazi youth. That was the only time I ever met anybody who'd been but she was not that anymore.
She was reformed. That's good to hear. So I have some other questions from folks in the meeting. So one of them is from Matthew. The question was, outside of advocacy and lawmaking, what's the best way to support low-income communities, and how do you see VISTA as a piece of that?
Well, I mean, my work obviously is in government, and I'm pretty aware that government makes a big difference in the policies that affect communities and people. So I was thinking about that. That is a really good question, because a lot of people say, oh, nonprofits. So, for example, take housing. So you say, let low income, let low income housing be built by private, nonprofits. There is no nonprofit that can build affordable housing without government support. Just can't be done because of the costs. So you need at least, you need zoning, you need low income housing credits, you need subsidies for people to be able to afford even the units you can build. So I think there has to be a recognition of both those things. And I think, whether you're formally a member of government or not, you can be involved in advocating for good policies that don't exclude people. But another thing that I think is really emerging as a need that is not met by private enterprise is for public information, that as we see the death of newspapers and even radio, and then the bifurcation of television news used to be, see, once again, none of you was old enough to remember when there were only three news channels and three sources of information, really one. If Walter Cronkite said it, everybody knew it. We all had the same information. We no longer do that. And that is why, and we don't know what other people think. So there is room. So I don't know if you know, certainly in Massachusetts, but I think all over the country, and I'm sure in Maine, we have lost local newspapers. They've been taken over. It's a little bit like housing, that local newspapers have been bought up by big chains, which then strip them of their staff. So, for example, there was a newspaper in my city that had at one point 4 staff, a city of 70,000 people. They could cover the news. They made a difference in elections. They could change people's perception of what was going on in the city. People knew what the school committee did. And we have no way to know now, because it was bought by a chain which now owns hundreds of local newspapers. First, it was combined with another news. First, they stripped it. It was down to one editor, no other staff, except for selling ads, and then combined with the Medford newspaper, still one staff. Now there's no staff, and it runs articles from all over the state, but not about Somerville. So I don't subscribe. Nobody, how do you know? So we need to, that's why, like, my husband's blog is good. But little groups of people are starting local news channels. I think some ways of building community information, I think that is a real area that people could be helpful in helping communities. That's just one example. I'd like to hear other people's examples if they have them, because you've probably been thinking about that. Not everybody wants to be the same thing. We don't want everybody to do the same thing. I don't want everybody to run for my Senate seat, let's say that.
Yeah, I mean, I do remember when when news reporting, everyone was trying to get to the facts and the reality. And now, as you said, it's bifurcated and it's less of an effort, it appears, to get to the facts of the base and more to getting what that individual's, it's too closely tied often to that individual's political beliefs, it seems like. I mean, there are some that are great, but to your point around local, that's it seems like that like adds insult to injury on the capability of the truth being figured out.
So people are putting in something about Nextdoor and Facebook. I think those are good. I will just say that my experience of online comment, especially that Reddit is another one that's happening, at least in my community. People are using Reddit to talk about community issues. But I think in those groups that are anonymous, that allow anonymous content, and for example, not just in those kinds of groups, but in the comment section in newspapers, it is so toxic. Just so, because you're not responsible. Nobody can see who you are, so you just say really mean and nasty things right up to the edge of what they'll let you say. So, and that Riley's point about seeing the friend in everyone, I mean, that is one thing about politics that I would say is really good for you, is that, well, it doesn't always work. It's better not to write people off. It's better to see the friend or see the human being in everyone, because there are very few people that don't have a lot in common with you. There are some, I would say, but far fewer than you think. And I win my elections for 2-1, 3-1. But who are those other people? They are still people that have good ideas about some things. So they see me probably in a very one-dimensional way, but I probably see them in a one-dimensional way. So I don't know a lot of people on the far right. It would be good for me if I did. My husband goes to demonstrations, and they're counting demonstrations, and he tries to have coffee with people from the other side. I think that's really good for him and good for them. It's good for everybody to try to, what does it feel like to have a really different point of view? And there are reasons. And if you don't know those reasons, you can't make a difference with them. I don't know. I think that's real. What Riley said is very, very important.
Yeah, absolutely. We have some more people typing in the chat as well. In the meantime, I wanted to go back to the point you made about newspapers and the kind of the death of the community conversation that's happening. And the other thing that came to mind was the way that headlines are sensationalized so that people are always, reading about the most upsetting thing, the most kind of, concerning, or instead of just giving people information, it's kind of become this sense of, I don't know, entertainment. And I don't know exactly how to phrase this, but just that there's kind of this commotion that's created by news as opposed to just genuinely informing people, that I think is probably creating some issues, and polarizing people more on both ends.
Could be. And then people want to have those headlines for themselves, and so they do things or say things that will succeed in. Can I say that I can think of a candidate who talks about creating stories that will grab people's attention, help them understand something that he thinks is important and good to understand. But the story itself becomes the news. I think that, yeah, I think everybody that's trying to make a difference does try to shape public opinion. They do want to be in the news. So they do we have demonstrations, we have rallies, we have press releases, but you have to get in people's attention. And so it does lead to people doing that sort of thing. And if you had to the extent we have an independent press that has time to look into stories, maybe that's a myth. I don't know. Actually, I think that's not hard to imagine doing. People love animals. More people have dogs than have children these days. Did you know that? Just about. I think that's right. I think half of American families have dogs. Huh? Oh, you didn't know that. And people really care about them. So I think you start with a particular issue. I can think of many that have come to the legislature. Banning declawing for cats. Free neutering of stray animals to prevent there being so many animals put down in kill shelters. One thing I worked on was getting a ban on greyhound racing in Massachusetts. There was a referendum on that. Very successful. So picking a piece of it, that's a big organization, 2K, and they continue to work to make sure we don't have simulcasting, which supports animal greyhound racing, simulcasting betting on races in Florida, for example, keeps that industry alive. So I think picking a particular cause, I think you will not find it hard to find other people, and then start with I guess go back to the thing about who is already in that space and get their advice. But I do think, yeah. So I think you have picked a very popular cause, but it is a matter of then you also have to figure out who's going to be the opposition. And in the case of greyhounds, it was a big opposition, all the gambling sites, as well as the dog race. And we still have horse racing, but there's always opposition, right?
I don't think I knew that greyhound racing was as prevalent as it seems to be.
It's much less prevalent. They've been very successful. Very, very successful.
Thank you for
So,
that.
anyway, I don't want to go off on that, but I think neglect is a really hard one. Yeah, we've done things like making it an offense to, I can't remember exactly what it is, but to chain a dog. Justin is asking a question which is really interesting about AI. That's a little scary, wouldn't you say? Because I asked ChatGPT to write me arguments in favor of rent control and arguments against it. It actually refused to do one of them. Said, I don't know enough to do that. And my husband had another experience with AI. He said, no, I can't answer that question. Ask me later. So, but what I do think is that it's not AI, but I get hundreds of emails a day from people not in my district who have just at one point hit a little button because they send me 4 emails a day about the same topic. It doesn't change my mind. It just makes me mad and takes up my staff's time. So, but I think automation, technology. I once read a biography of Lyndon Johnson. I have apparently a lot to say here. I I have been thinking about this a lot. But Lyndon Johnson's first job in Washington was as a clerk, as a staff person to a congressman. He answered every letter on a typewriter, every letter. If I had a staff of 1,000 people, I couldn't do that because everybody can do it so simply, and they can do a mass email, and then they don't even have to write it. And so I will get things to me say, please co-sponsor Senator Jehlen's amendment. That's my amendment. I can't co-sponsor it. Didn't read the thing that you're sending me. Very annoying. So I'm not a big fan of that kind of technology. On the other hand, I do have a program, and if everybody sends me the same email, I can write one letter and send it to all of them.
There you go. Time saving in the other direction, huh?
But I don't know. What do you all think about AI? I see it's great for like research, but is it correct? I don't know.
To your point earlier, it almost seemed like if it can't make a decision on one thing, there's probably just less content there. So is it really just amplifying what everybody else is already saying compared to actually being, it's not truly being thoughtful. It's
That's interesting.
It's scraping. It's like the lowest common denominator, right? It's scraping whatever the most people are saying and putting it out there compared to actually analyzing what might be the best, perhaps in some instances.
Oh, people are asking just pressing questions. AI robots, thank you. Just so cheerful. You know what kind of jobs AI will never take? It's jobs that require human contact. So caregiving jobs, taking care of children, taking care of old people, taking care of disabled people. And those are the lowest paid jobs. So AI will not, well, they do have little robots to keep you company when you're an old person, but I don't think that works so well. I think human contact is really hard to replace, and human relationships. And I mean, I think I'll go back to community organizing. I think that on a national level, maybe that is not as important, but let me tell you, in local politics and in the legislature, there is nothing more important than human relationships. And AI will not, of course, I don't know, but I don't think you can replace people caring about each other. I mean,
speaking about people caring for each other, you've served a whole, a whole plethora of jobs and roles in your life. Sounds like lots of which were based in caring for each other, and starting from VISTA's focus on like trying to end poverty, like sort of how come I imagine you've thought about this a bunch. How come we still have poverty? Do you have thoughts on how we end poverty in the country slash the world?
Well, frankly, I think it's a political question.
Right.
I think, and I am reluctant to talk about that very much because of my instructions at the beginning. But I think
Yeah.
as income has become more concentrated, wealth has become more concentrated, and then power has become more concentrated. And the people who have a lot of income, money, wealth, and power probably weren't in VISTA. Let's say that. I can remember when my daughter was born, singing to her. I don't know if you all remember Guantanamera, and then at one point it says, "Con los pobres de la tierra quiero yo mi suerte echar." I didn't want to live. I wouldn't want to be a person who who had 5 mansions and 6 airplanes. So I think it would be good if more people had the experience of living and knowing people who are not like them. We do have programs where, like, our former governor, Deval Patrick, was part of a program that put him in a private school. He was a black kid from Chicago, put in a private school in Massachusetts, grew up with white rich kids. And that's good for everybody, probably. Wouldn't hurt for maybe some, anyway, that's never going to happen. But getting to know different kinds of people, I think, is really important, and not just knowing the same kinds of people all the time.
Right.
That's one of the reasons why as VISTAs, oh, sorry to interrupt you, Steve.
No, you keep going.
As VISTAs, that's why we're not paid very much money, because we're doing important work in communities that are at a certain income level, and we want to experience living at that income level as well. And also, it is, to some extent, the VISTA program is for people of privilege who are possibly able to be in this space to do this important work in communities where they may not have been before, may not fully understand the scope of poverty there, the experiences of people in those communities. So sorry, that was kind of a long-winded sentence, but I guess, yeah, my point is just that VISTA is placing us in a similar position.
And you all are in programs that are organized through Goodwill Industries, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And there's also some alum on here, and like
Say it again?
There are some AmeriCorps alum on here. There's some staff. So there's current members, some alums, and some staff for our programs.
I'm curious if it sort of sounds like Emma shares my thoughts about the value of living in a different way. That for me, yeah, I had forgotten about the fact that we were paid $40 a week.
Yeah, I think it's just, you spoke to the fact that there's a housing crisis right now, and that wealth is being kind of hoarded in ways. And also, yeah, I'm trying to toe the line of not getting too deep into that, but I think I really admire, and I'm sure all of us admire, your candor. And yeah, I absolutely agree. I see it firsthand every day playing out where I work on Portland Street, that there is a massive housing crisis, and that more and more every day there's less and less housing. We don't need to get into why that is, but I think that's an important point, that until these things are addressed, we really won't. It's difficult to get at the root of the issue when there's so many other forces that maybe are preventing that from happening, but still the work is so important. So
nutrition education, that is great. And making sure that people have the resources. One thing I hear, and maybe you know that, whether it's true or not, is that good food is more expensive. So I imagine you're teaching people how to find and afford good food and to prepare it in ways that they may not know about. And you're probably learning that you have to listen to them and find out what they like to eat, because it's hard to change people's habits, including me. I don't like mushrooms.
So I know we're kind of nearing the end here, perhaps, but
Good, you can have mine.
I think we have another comment in the chat here, Senator Jehlen, if you're welcome to answer that.
What's that? I see. I love mushrooms.
Riley just said all of our classes are free and
yeah.
focused to affordably have access to nutritious
And
food.
Riley is not from New England. Am I right?
Oh, Michigan.
I'm from Michigan. Okay, great. No, I think you're experiencing the coast. That's good. And you're telling people about what the Midwest, is that Midwest, is like. And you say, yes, ma'am. You are borderline South. Well, this was great. Thank you. I really enjoyed thinking about this a lot. Enjoyed meeting you. I'm glad to know you're there. And sure, I mean, I'm pretty easy to find if any of you ever. I will volunteer if any of you decides to do something that would benefit from, a little advice, or if you happen to move into my area. I don't know many people outside of my area, but yeah. Thank you very much. And thank you for your service.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Very
so
nice
much.
thank you for sharing and letting us ask you questions.
I hope that you recover well. COVID is not fun. So thank you for talking as long as you did. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.